Welcome to the World War One stream. This is your host, Vadi von Bumstink. We're joined by MC here, and today we're just going to be going through November and December of the timeline until we get to specific subjects, and we'll get onto that when we get to it. Take it away, MC.
Yeah, okay, so let me share my screen with the timeline so people can see the timeline as we go through it. There we go. So we start off with the Battle of La Mal-Asan ends. All right, and we talked about this the last time, right? And this is the battle that basically, for a short period of time, allowed Romania to exist. Okay, it was a defeat, right? From the standpoint of the Romanians that they lost, but they were able to hold and stop the major breakthrough, right? This ends, all right. Then you have the Ministry of National Services formed in Great Britain. This is the draft, correct?
Yep, that's a separate government department that is solely just to organise the whole conscription thing.
So we have that. Then you have the raid by the British and the light naval forces in Kadak. All right. Now, Kadak, for those who don't know, is basically the area between Denmark, right, and the Danish coastline is where it's at. It's off the Danish coast. Now, what this was a major action, all right, from the perspective of the Danes. And the result of this is actually pretty devastating for the Germans, all right? Because what it came about, what it pointed out was that the British fleet could go into this area, blow up ships along the inside of the Kadak area, which is kind of like on the other side of the Danish peninsula, with impunity. And the Danes, who had an agreement with the Germans, right? Basically were not able to live up to those agreements, that they were not capable of actually stopping British forces from raining havoc if they needed to in those areas. And what was interesting about this is yes, they used light naval forces. They used a few destroyers, all right, on a raid, but they also brought in British submarines. All right. So, I mean, this was after this battle, the Germans no longer trust the Danes to do anything. They can't trust them. All right. Mm-hmm. So it really put a wedge, all right, in Germany's plans for how they were going to go forward. Then you have the arrival on November 3rd of French troops in Italy, because Italy is wavering and they're terrified that Italy is getting ready to go the way of Russia. Then you have the agreement between the French, the British, and the Italian governments for provision of tonnage for Allied food programs. Imagine that you got to feed the Italians because the war is causing issues, all right? And this is a problem when you take the manpower out of the countryside, all right? Now, this was also a problem, one of the problems, to be honest, that you had in Russia. When you take the people who are producing the food and you put them on the front lines and they die in droves, people aren't able to produce food. Okay? And that becomes problematic. And so basically this was an agreement to say, okay, we're going to allow food shipping. We're going to guarantee food shipping, all right, not only to the British Isles and to the French, all right. Now, France was... most of the French countryside was unaffected by the war. People have to understand this. Yes, their men are being dying, all right, but at least they're able to produce. And of course, you got the major breadbasket of the world just across the Atlantic. So basically, what was happening here now is British is saying, okay, we will prevent the Central Powers, all right, from interdicting food shipments, all right, around. And this is more of a commitment, to be honest, to seal off, all right, the even though that they're small, but they're to seal off the effective Austro-Hungarian forces, all right, that could interdict food supplies to Italy.
See, that's another thing that a lot of people might not realise as well, is that, yes, while France had been invaded and all this kind of stuff, there still was the industry, the agriculture, and a lot of stuff left over, and especially in the parts that hadn't been taken, they were still producing food, they were still producing weapons, they were still producing all sorts of different things. It was just it was being completely constrained by the fact that they've got to pump it all into a war.
Yes. Now, France, for the most part, was, I mean, yes, French territory has been taken. And it's significant, but it's not overwhelming. The territory that's taken in World War I is not overwhelmingly, overwhelming France. It's not 90% of France. In fact, it's only about 10 or 15% of France. All right, that has German soldiers on it.
The issue is, like, you can't not ignore it because, well, okay, they haven't taken over the whole place, but that's because you're stopping them at the moment. If you stop trying to stop them, then they will take over the whole lot.
Yes. All right. Then you have the action in Tikrit. All right. As you know, where everybody should know where Tikrit is. Tikrit is basically in Iraq. It's in the northern section of Iraq. You can see that the British forces are basically taking out Mesopotamia. All right. Away, and they're taking it away from the Ottoman Turks.
Yep.
On November 6th, Passchendaele is captured by the British. Tikrit is occupied by the British forces. The third battle of Gaza ends, and we talked about that. You want to talk some more about the Anzac troops there?
Well, this is with Beersheba, and then after Beersheba, there was another push to finally take Gaza, which is the third battle of Gaza. This is just basically mopping up from the Beersheba special that we did. We'll then proceed up the coast of the Mediterranean, through Israel, I believe into Jordan, Iraq, and then most likely Syria as well. But that's the push that we'll be making for the next few months. Okay.
The Allied Conference of Rapallo, the inception of the Supreme War Council. All right. This is basically just an acknowledgement of the addition of the United States more than anything, right?
Yeah, that and the Italians and all that kind of stuff. It's renaming and restructuring. It's exactly the same thing, but it's more of a symbolic, right? You're not that anymore. You are now this.
Right. I mean, really, it's more along the lines of, okay, what can the U.S. do? All right. I mean, the U.S. is now here. How can they add things? That's what the conference, and of course, everybody has, their hand up, going, "Help us, please."
Yeah, basically, this is an equalisation of rank structures to put everybody on an even keel. Bringing the Americans in, right? Okay, what's the equivalent of your rank? Right, general. Right. Well, yeah, it's all the generals and shit. They're all the same rank.
That's also very important as well. That I mean, people don't realize that, but when you're dealing with allied forces, an alliance of forces, the military rank structure, all right, becomes quite important. All right, it sounds kind of dubious to, like I said, to civilians, but rank and how rank is recognized is an important part of being in the military, because it's a rank structure. I mean, it's a society based on rank. Right?
Then you also have a look at the differences in things, right? America has their rank structure and all this kind of stuff. That's by appointment. A lot of the European stuff, that's been earned by fucking family names and honours and all this kind of shit. So you have the French general who will see, say, an American one-star general say, and speaking to a one-star general, he's below me. You do have that kind of thing, and that even came up to World War II in certain instances where the German officer had to surrender to an American officer, and just because like the American was a major and this guy was like a fucking full colonel or something like that, it's like no, I'm not. No, go get your commanding officer. They've had those kinds of instances before.
Yeah. Okay. Then you have General Cardona relieved the command of the Italian armies. All right, this is the guy who came up with the San Zio plan. All right. They've had 17 attacks back and forth across there, and lost millions of people, but they haven't gotten anywhere. Okay, and then he's replaced by Diaz. Then you have all right, and then on November 8th, the Bolshevik coup d'état at Petrograd. All right, the Lenin and Trotsky assume power, and the former Krasinski as prime minister later succeeds Tereshchenko, all right, as the foreign minister. All right. So basically now what you have is the provisional government of Russia, which was continuing the war, is being ousted. Specifically, and it starts with a coup d'etat in Petrograd. All right.
Yeah.
The Second Battle of Passchendaele ends. The Austro-Hungarian forces reach the Plav River. This is in the Romanian-Hungarian area. Krasinski's forces are defeated by the Bolsheviks, right? The action of El Mugahar, all right? This is as you're beginning from your mop-up operation, you're getting ready to move forward, right? But I think, all right, on the November 14th, you with Major Palavé, I guess that's how you pronounce it, all right? The French premier and war minister resigned. Mr. Bartholomew, the foreign minister, resigns. The British government gives further pledge to the House of Commons that restitution of the Alsace-Lorraine is a war aim. Now, why would you do that? And I say you because you're the closest thing to the British. I realize it isn't your thing. But why would the British agree to give the Alsace-Lorraine back to the French? Because that's what it means, right? The restitution of the Alsace-Lorraine.
Yeah, well, the whole thing is that we're going to basically put the borders back to where they were if we win, and that was just a thing with France. Don't worry, you'll get whatever territories. We will give you back your territories, pretty much.
But the Alsace-Lorraine had been lost to the Prussians in what was it, 1873? That time frame, Bismarck time frame, right?
Not sure exactly how far they decided, what France was France, but that was basically the thing. Yeah, you can have that back.
Okay. The Japanese government is unable to comply with a request of British government that 2 Japanese battle cruisers join the Grand Fleet in the North Sea. Now, okay. Japan is on the side of the Allies. They are an allied force.
Yep.
But they're on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
Okay, how are they going to sit up there and supply 2 battle cruisers? I mean, those are not insignificant ships, right?
However,
those are the capital ships, right?
Yeah. However, there's a big draw card with that. We don't need to actually supply their ships from Japan. We only need to feed their crews and stuff like that, because the Japanese, during the turn of the century, the Boxer Rebellion and all that, saw Britain and went, geez, they're militarily, technologically advanced. Well, why don't we look at them? And from basically 1900 up until just before World War II, they were pretty much buying their warships off Britain. And they had top-of-the-line warships from Britain with British guns and British shit all over it. So all they needed to do was put those British ships near Britain. Britain can supply the ships. All we need to do is feed the crew.
Okay, but still, logistically, they have other plans in the Pacific that is impacted by this, right?
Well, but they also do have a very, very huge fleet. I mean, we'll have to go back a little bit before World War War I, but there was 1910. The Russo-Japanese War. There's the movement of the Second Pacific Fleet, which was the Baltic Fleet, and it wasn't the best fleet under the sun, but they took the Baltic Fleet and they moved it all the way down the Atlantic, around some of it went through the Suez, and most of it went around the Horn of Africa, all the way across the Indian, up through the bottom of Southeast Asia, all the way around, trying to get to the Black Sea.
Yeah, one of these days we should do a story on that, because In
Oh
some ways,
yes.
it was very impressive. In other ways, it's
Oh,
like,
no,
oh
no, the
my
Kamchatka.
lord.
The fucking Kamchatka. Just to fucking talk about the goddamn Kamchatka on that fucking, oh Jesus Christ. Yeah, when we do it, guys, tune into that. It'll be fucking hilarious. You don't believe how much of a fucking clusterfuck this thing was. Like, this is just a fucking barrel of laughs, and it's like, it's so fucking bad. You just say, like, this cannot have actually happened. And you're like, it did? And that's not the full story? More? Are you fucking joking?
Yeah, it's
And
that movement was something else. But anyway, that's
but
what we're
yeah, but
we're
so
diverging a little bit here. But I
so
think that
yeah, but
I think Japan was more than justified to say, look, you don't need extra naval forces there,
well,
especially
the whole but the whole
with the United States moving in. Let's be honest.
well the whole logistics of getting them around there isn't something that could be laughed at, and especially too with the Japanese also had more of an advantage than what the Russians did a few years previously, because the Japanese are still friends with the British, and the British have all of these ports and shit all around the world and all the colonies and stuff where these Japanese ships can refuel and all that. So moving them isn't as much of a drama as the Russians were, because the Russians had pissed everybody off and they were having troubles refueling and stuff like that, whereas the Japanese don't have that.
Well,
So,
but at the same time, I mean, they don't have to get there. Yeah, but getting them back, and also, let's be honest, moving them into a theater of war that's far more active and far more dangerous to the fleet, these fleet ships. And then once more, another aspect becomes then, okay, then who gets to tell them what to do? So there's a number of things that they get involved in.
Well, it'd be the British, but like I said, they've got modern British battleships and modern British battle cruisers. These are like things that so some of them been supplied during the war,
right?
And
but Japan does not. These are capital ships. These are big ships. These aren't small ones.
Yeah.
These are some of the big ships, and Japan has uses for them outside of being in the Atlantic at this point. Yeah, they could have done it. I'm not saying that they couldn't have done it, but I'm looking from a Japanese perspective. They're like, okay, do you really need our help as an ally in this regard? And the answer, let's be frank, is no.
Well, I'd put it to you like this: that with the Russo-Japanese War, that the Japanese Navy showed that they were very, very competent, very, very professional. They would be people that you would really, really want on your side. Even if with only just a couple of ships, they could do quite a bit of damage. And I'd put it to you also that the Japanese at that point in time would have gone, can you bring us into something that's going to shoot at us so we can get some experience, please? I'd put it to you like that.
You could look at it that standpoint, but you also could look at it from the standpoint of the Japanese saying, okay, we can now use these ships to help us in some of our territorial ambitions, which they do. They have some territorial ambitions throughout the islands, the island campaign in the Pacific.
So there's also another little known aspect about, like, particularly naval warfare, and particularly that far back in history, is that with the navies, there's very few and far sort of examples of where you can gain experience, and in a lot of cases, and it happened to be just in the Atlantic side of the Americas, not just the United States, but the entirety of the continent. The British, French, German, even American ships, if it was in South America, if any country was having a kickoff, you'd have navies coming in from other places around the world just to observe it and see what's going on, see if they could learn a new tactic here or there, and you'd have navies sending a ship off to get their nose dirty somewhere, just so as they could come back. It's like, oh, have you learnt any new tricks? How's our new ships working? Can they take a hit? How's our guns? Are they accurate?
Well, okay, but that's not. Those aren't capital ships, though. Generally, those are generally light forces like cruisers or even light cruisers and destroyers.
Yeah, they're generally not getting involved. Whereas in this case, we've got a war that you can observe, and the people who are running the war are actually inviting you in. So, why wouldn't you?
I don't think that this is so much of a stick in the eye. I think this is more of a Japan trying to feel its way in the world, right? Becoming a major player on the world stage and just not looking at it from a national sovereignty standpoint, they decide not to help out.
Oh yeah, yeah. A lot of it is leading up to like having the experience to get up to World War II and all that kind of stuff, and a lot of it is expansionist and with views on that.
Do you see Yorkie? Yorkie says he's backstage, by the way.
Oh, hang on. Yep. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong page. Hey, Yorkie. Okay. Sorry about that, mate.
No, it's fine. I've chilled the stream to like 5 or 6 places. Different servers. I pulled the memes and just spammed it everywhere.
Oh, and sorry. Hello, Mr. Goatman in the chat. I'm terribly sorry. I've been looking at the timeline.
All right, let's get back to the timeline since we're talking about it anyway.
Yep.
Krasinski flees from Petrograd, which we talked about during our Russia stream. Jaffa falls to the British forces. Now, this is a big event, isn't it? Because this sets up the whole Lawrence of Arabia issue, correct?
Yep.
Because how Jaffa goes and where it goes, the British at this point now have made deals, all right, with the French, and the Arabs are going to be limited in what their territorial ambitions are and their freedom that they're going to get.
Yep, but they don't know that part yet.
Right. Clemenceau is the French premier and war minister. Stephen Pichon, or Stéphane Pichon, however you pronounce it, is appointed the French foreign minister. And Major Yonart succeeds Major Mitten as the French minister for the blockade. The Battle of Nebi Samil. I said Samil. Samil. Okay. And then you have a light cruiser action off the Helgoland. This is actually a cruiser action initiated by the British to the British's disadvantage. All right, the Germans actually drive this. It's another raiding party by the British that's actually driven off. General Sir Maud, the commander-in-chief of the Mesopotamia, dies in Baghdad and is succeeded by Lieutenant Sir W.R. Marshall. Do you know anything about these two?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. Then we have the Battle of Cambrai, which we went in depth already. And then the Ukrainian People's Republic is proclaimed, for as short-lived as it is. Because during the White Revolution, they basically are conquered by the Soviets and become part of the Soviet Union. The armistice of the populars begun in the Russia Bolshevik government with central powers. In other words, the Russians now, the Bolsheviks have taken over, and they declare an armistice with the Germans and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And
so this is the thing that we were worried about. That basically, right, we're suing for peace. Stop shooting at us. And the Germans can say, right, we don't have to shoot at them anymore. Let's turn around and go the other way.
Right now, and this causes ripple effects across the entire front, because the Western Front is now worried that the Germans are going to be able to plus up. The people on the Eastern Front that had been allies of the Russia, they've lost a major supporter. Romania has to collapse now because they're a big supporter of Russia. The Ottoman Turks can attempt to realign their forces. Now, that's probably where it has the least effect, only because the Ottoman Turkish Empire is not prepared internally, logistically, to be able to move forces around. All right. So even though this takes pressure off of the Turks from the standpoint of the Russians, they can't. The forces that were fighting against the Russians can't be easily, be redeployed in other sectors, and so the bleeding continues for them. The Battle of German Airship L-59 leaves Yambul for Bulgaria for East Africa. All right. Now,
We're not entirely sure whether they actually did this or whether they did it just to say that they could, because this one's anecdotal.
yeah, this is an interesting. It's kind of like a propaganda move. Okay, where they say that they did it. Okay, but there's no evidence that they did it. There's no evidence that they sent an airship all the way from Bulgaria, all the way down across the Mediterranean and into East Africa and brought it back. Okay, there's every instance that it could have been the Spruce Goose situation. They could very well have done it, just fly there, turn around and come back just to say that they did it, just take it off the water just for a few minutes and then put it back down again. See, it'll fly. But we don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting, but it is a propaganda coup. You know, it is something that's announced, and the Germans at this point are announcing it because just to say that they're not giving up on their territorial ambitions in Africa. Really, right? I think that's for the most part what their intent was, because they want it. Because in reality, what do they really do? All right, it's also done to, offer some kind of moral support to the Ottoman Turks, right? But in reality, did they ever actually do it? There's a lot of debate. There's a lot of debate that it never took place. The Battle of Nibli Samuel ends. Ayan Ed Dobra succeeds Allah I can't even pronounce that, as the Persian minister. The German L-59 returns. The German force under Colonel Letwal Verbeck affects passage of the Rumova. I can't.
Mano.
Okay, defeats the Portuguese forces at Nagumo. Nagomano. Right. This is the last. I think this is the last successful operation that the Germans were able to perform in Africa. Correct?
Yeah. To pronounce that place name correctly, you've got to do like that Kossa fucking thing from The Gods Must Be Crazy with the. It's Mo or something like that. But the first part, it sounds like you're fucking trying to fucking choke on yourself.
Okay. I'm not intentionally butchering some of these names.
That one's difficult to pronounce, that one.
Members of the but I'm horrible with names when it comes to it. Anyway, members of the Supreme Council appointed Sir William Wilson and General Foch and General Cardona and General Bliss. All right, General Bliss is the American. In fact, we have a Fort Bliss named after him. Fort Bliss.
I knew an American bloke called Sky Bliss, and Jesus Christ, he was the puffiest motherfucker you ever seen. Sky Bliss.
Go ahead.
I can't remember much. We didn't really learn much about the entirety of the First World War when I was doing history in school, but the other bits I can remember is around 1918 is when Germany started to really starve, and I'm guessing we've already gone past the Russian Revolution. I think that was 1917.
Right. Well, that's what we're in right now. This is 1917. The end of 1917, and the Russians, the Bolshevik Revolution, which we did a stream specifically on them, is actually taking place and going on during this time frame. Actually,
where we're at right now, Rasputin's gone, the Tsar's gone.
Yep.
Lenin's just taken over. Literally, he's just got the reins.
Right. Now, this is going to lead to the Civil War and the official takeover in May. but the reality is the Bolsheviks have basically taken over Germany at this point, which is why you're seeing in this next day the meeting between the Russians and the German delegates behind German lines to arrange for the permanent armistice. Right, basically a cessation of all hostilities.
And whilst that's going on, was Britain and France still trying to bribe Russia to stay in? When it's
Pretty
something
much,
like
yeah.
£300 million or some shit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
up to the point where the Bolsheviks took over. The British were attempting to keep Russia in the war. They were desperate to keep Russia in the war. And if, for all intents and purposes, unfortunately, it fails.
Yeah.
All right, the German force under Captain Tafil surrenders to the British in the Mitwa Valley. Right, this is the East Africa campaign as the British continue to advance. Estonia declared independent by the local Diet. You see, Estonia, for the people who don't know, is a Baltic nation, and they're declaring their independence from Russia for as long as they last, because they're getting ready to join the Soviet Union. But that comes a little bit later. The first meeting of the Great Inter-Allied Conference opens up in Paris. The Air Force Act of 1917 comes into operation in Great Britain. You want to talk about that, Farty?
Yes. Now, this is the basically the inception of the Royal Air Force. This is the birth of the Royal Air Force. We've got the Royal Flying Corps at the moment. That's attached to the army, and basically the army is supplying the logistics and the equipment and the training and the manpower and all this. What this actually does is it separates the air group from the military and makes it a separate, complete service of its own. So it draws its own rations, it draws its own manpower, it draws its own logistics and stores and all this kind of stuff. It is now its own entity. The Royal Air Force has just been born.
Yeah, this might have been around the time there were. Have any of you guys heard of the Farquhar Hill rifle?
Farquhar Hill rifle. Yep, it's a 303 modification. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically, if you don't know MC, they're basically converted. It was basically a semi-automatic rifle with a box magazine of, I think, like 20 or 25 rounds, which that was way ahead of its time. But because the war was just about to start coming to an end, they didn't really get that many of them, and we just went back to Lee Enfields. Yeah. It was the Flying Corps that picked most of them.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, it had this sort of like a early drum magazine, and if you watch the Forgotten Weapons episode on it, if you don't handle the magazine correctly, you'll just throw all your ammunition all over the place because there's no real
You've got a lot of spring.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that up, because it does bring in differences in weapons, because we've already brought up machine guns and things like that, but we haven't really brought on infantry weapons that are appearing on the battlefield at about this point in time. And the Farquhar Hill rifle is a great example of people trying to think outside the box, taking the weapons and the things that we already have already, saying, can we do anything with them? And there was the Farquhar Hill rifle was basically an add-on gas return system that worked the bolt for you. If you ever actually have a look at this rifle, it's fucking scary to look at, because literally this thing is going to launch a 303 bolt in your face.
Yeah, is there a way to the screenshot? Are you able to host me so I could just share the screen and show an image?
Yeah. Go to the share screen.
If I can do it. If it'll load. Is it loading now?
There we go.
Oh, there.
There we go.
That's a picture of one.
It's kind of complicated.
Yeah, I don't think they were cheap. I think that's why it was only the Air Force that started purchasing them. Which is a shame we got rid of them right after the First World War, because we definitely could have done with investing in more of them at the start, before the Second World War started.
Well, the thing of that is that there was far better and far more appropriate equipment after World War II than there was, after World War One, than the stuff that was coming through. And the Farquhar Hill rifle, while it was an idea and it could have probably worked, there was a lot of finicky stuff. Just the magazine alone, that was a pain in the ass.
the thing that caught everybody off guard, to be honest, all right, was the lack of use of the Thompson submachine gun. The Thompson submachine gun could have been used, all right, but the inventor was kind of
An asshole.
well. He was on the outs. Let's say is the best description of it. All right.
Sounds a bit like what happened with the guy that developed the original, what the Luger was based off, with the toggle lock system. The thing is, the entire bolt system was like this giant curve behind, so it was really awkward to hold.
The Thompson was being created right at the end of the 1917, and we never really ramped up production, right, the way we could have if they had played nice together, all right, and they could have made a huge difference in the war, all right, because of just how powerful they would have been in dealing with trench warfare, right. Because you're given a machine gun, all right, to every infantry soldier. That's what you've got the capability of doing with the Thompson. But there were logistics issues. There were several different issues that really, it's unfortunate we didn't play a bigger part in the armaments, all right, that we could have done, all right, if the United States had been in a different mentality prior to the war. Our late entry in the war was really, really hampered the war effort because of our own, isolation tendencies.
It also didn't help things that Colt wanted full price, up front.
Yep.
Kind of thing. Yep. There was no lead lease thing. They wanted full price, and it was about the equivalent of about $2,000 a gun. These days, apparently.
And that's another problem is that we resolved that in World War II simply because there was national seizures. All right, meaning the government basically said you will do this. We went full authoritarian during World War II. People don't remember this, but we go in World War I. We don't go full authoritarian. In World War II, we do.
Yeah, what is something like your entire 30 or 35% of your entire budget was for the war?
Well, yeah, because back then the federal government's war, the federal government, its power is quite a bit more limited at this time frame than what it looks like later on. All right, the national governments are not the big power base that people think. People think of the federal government today, and they think that the kind of power that it has was similar to what was happening in World War I. It was not. All right, and people forget this. We had 10,000 men under arms right prior to declaring war with Germany. We had to plus that up. All right, we're 10,000. Hell, we're gonna need 1 million. All right, so you have to go through the entire logistics of arming these guys, feeding these guys. The whole logistical chain has to be ramped up. And even though we have declared war in April of 1917. It's taking 6 months before we can even really to begin deployment.
Yeah, and with the prices of the Thompsons, that's why in the Second World War we went with the Sten gun, because for the cost of a single Thompson submachine gun, we could actually produce some like 12 or 15 Sten guns.
And that there itself too, it's fairly interesting in the way that weapons and warfare goes and things like that. I think the limited use of the Thompson actually saved it for being used in World War II. So the World War I Thompson machine guns worked on a Blischlock system, and a Blischlock is it's basically friction between two differing metals. So this is steel, and I think the Blischlock was actually made out of copper. And that was supposed to do like a delayed blowback reaction type deal just by the friction of the two metals. Now, this Blischlock was a little plate, and that can be separated from the bolt. In fact, that's part of the way you clean it. And, of course, it's a very small part, and yes, it would be lost. And there was a lot of occasions where Thompson machine guns, the operators had lost their Blischlock in World War I. I reckon if they had put more out there, that Blischlock would have been such a bloody drama that they possibly would have looked at something else. to try and replace it. They would have done a lot of things like World War II with the Sten gun.
Well,
Try and look for that.
But what's worse is absconding with the panic and all, or I mean a patent, not panic, patent. Right, the government would have grabbed the patent, which would have created an interesting dynamic in and of itself. Okay, on to December.
But hang on, had the prevalence of submachine guns in the Allied side become more prevalent, then we would have been looking at it a lot harder between the wars, and we would have found something a lot more appropriate than the Thompson submachine gun going into World War II, which is what we didn't do. So I think the limited use actually saved it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
What was the drawbacks to the Thompson? 'Cause all I'm aware of is for a submachine gun, it was quite heavy and
Weight,
also 45.
It's heavy.
weight, and caliber.
It's heavy. It uses the 45 caliber. When you're looking at the rest of the Commonwealth, we're using 9mm. That's a little bit of a logistics issue. There were a fair lot of parts. So when you do strip it down and all that kind of stuff, it was a little bit parts intensive. There was issues with the drum magazines, things like that. A lot of these.
The drum magazines were a problem, which is why you see standard magazines used. All right, in the productions in World War II. All right, it didn't do it for the drug. They could just do it with a standard magazine, but the drum magazines were an issue.
Yeah, I think that's why drum magazines are rarely used in modern militaries, just because they're a bit awkward and cumbersome to hold. Like you could actually contain more ammunition in pouches because you could fit more regular magazines in.
In a lot of occasions, yeah. Another thing that was a big drawback for the Thompson was the amount of time you had to spend to actually make one. There was a lot of machining work, a lot of finishing work. There was a lot of work that had to go into a Thompson, and it's exactly what you said, Yorkie, with the whole Sten gun. You could go down to a hardware store and build 12 Sten guns for the same amount of time and effort and money that you did to put
but working in war was also kind of iffy. The Sten gun didn't have a very good reputation, especially early on.
Yeah, I think the biggest drawback, the biggest issue the Sten gun had was the magazine itself. It was like I think it was the feeding lips were designed more for like single stack magazines, but it was double stacked, so it was very prone to jamming and not feeding.
Well, that's part of the learning process of weapons, to be honest.
There were a few other little issues with that. There's the whole where it sits in the magazine well, and where you hold there's a few problems that were arising because of that. Like, so where you hold the Sten gun with the magazine, you're basically holding it on the magazine well, where the magazine release catch is. So some people can overextend the magazine. Some people release the magazine during firing. There are issues with that. Yeah, that's why.
Certainly step granddad, well, ex-step granddad, my mum and stepdad broke up, but he was in the conflict in Cyprus in I think it was the late 50s or early 60s, and he was actually bomb disposal, and he said with how shit the Sten guns were, if you dropped it, there was a very good chance it'd actually start firing.
Yeah. Well, it was bloody cheap. It was bloody simple.
Yeah.
There are things. Let's get back to the November 30th. The German counterattacks at Cambrai begin. This is the continuation of the battle, the German counterattacks, which are somewhat successful. To be honest, though, they don't take back even half of the territory that they had lost. The Allied Naval Conference is formed in London. The Austro-Hungarian government accepts the Bolshevik proposals to negotiate for the armistice. Basically, they're agreeing, and then the actual armistice happens in December coming up. December 1st, the Permanent Allied War Council is inaugurated. The last German forces are driven out of East Africa into Portuguese territory. Suspension of hostilities between the Russian and German armies begins on December 2nd. Then on December 3rd, the Battle of Cambrai ends. The first session of the armistice, known as the Truce Delegates or Peace Delegates, in the Brest-Litovsk Okay, and Bolshevik Russia, and Bulgaria, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. The Allied Conference in Paris has resolved to establish an Allied Maritime Transport Council. Finland declares its independence, all right, which it will fight a war for later on. Hostilities between Romania and the Central Powers is suspended. In other words, Romania, they're hosed. Okay. There's no other way to describe it. All right.
They're already on Shit Creek and they just dropped their paddle.
I mean, what's Romania supposed to do now? The one thing that was keeping them in the war was Russia, and Russia's pulling out. Then the United States Battleship Division under Rear Admiral Rodman joins the Grand Fleet at Scapa Flow. Now, you knew this was going to be happening, which is why I was saying, the Japanese knowing that this is coming, why are they going to risk their capital ships? It's not like the Allies really needed it, to push that far.
Yeah, well, that still goes with the whole experience and all this kind of stuff. I mean, like, they also could say to the Japanese, like, things are pretty safe for you to send shit over. But it could also be, yeah, we'll get the Japs involved too. Hey, Germany, even the Japs have come all the way around the other side of the world just to tell you to get nicked.
Yeah, no, you got a point. I mean, that's obvious. On December 7th, the day that'll live in infamy a few decades from now. All right, the United States of America declares war on the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Notice, we've declared war on Germany, but we hadn't declared war on Austro-Hungary. Ecuador severs diplomatic relations with Germany. The truce between Russia and the Central Powers comes into full effect. On December 8th, all hostilities in the Eastern Front are suspended. That for the moment, to be honest, at that point, very little hostilities were actually happening because Germany is already at the point where they're beginning to move their troops out. They're already moving their troops to the east. I mean, for them, they're moving them to the west. They're moving the eastern troops to the west. Jerusalem surrenders to the British forces on the 9th. The Italian naval raid on Trieste Harbor, all right, where the Austrian battleship Vine is sunk. Now, this is with the help of the British, all right, to put an end to the scourge of Austro-Hungarians using their submarine fleet, because they've been a problem, all right, especially for the Italians. The subfleet has been a problem. The Truce of Fosca is signed between Russia, Romania, and the Central Powers. Romania remains a nation state, all right, but without Russia there to support them, they basically are out of the war for all intents and purposes. It's basically the last hurrah of the people that were supporting the Serbs, the Baltic, the southern Baltic region, or Balkan region. I'm sorry, not Baltic.
Yes,
Balkan region. Panama declares war on Austria-Hungary. Not much of a surprise. All right. Dr. Cardoso de la Paz succeeds Da Costa as the Portuguese prime minister because Portugal is doing so well in the war. All right. The Russian Constituent Assemblies meets in Petrograd. General Allenby makes a formal entry into Jerusalem. All right. Now, you want to talk about that?
this is the culmination of what Beersheba was, and Allenby has just basically proven his point here. He's like, yep, this is how we use it, this is how we fight it, this is how we do it. And this is, you see how long it's only been, just 2 months from Beersheba to Jerusalem. And if you have a look at the way that the war's been working everywhere else, that's a bloody big push. Yeah,
and what's more is this is the culmination of winning the race, right? The big prize in the Middle East was to who could take Jerusalem, and the Arabs were trying for it, but they lose that race and they have to settle for Damascus.
Yep, and the foreign movement, we kicked them out of Beersheba and Gaza, and this is where we put them on the back foot, and we didn't let them stop and have a breath. We just kept on chasing them and chasing them and chasing them. Every time they tried to stop and reconsolidate, they wouldn't have enough time. We'd come up behind them so fast that as soon as they'd stop to try and turn around and shoot, they'd just look back quick enough to go, nope, keep going.
All right. Guilherme, the Portuguese president, is deposed. Funchal, I assume that's how it's pronounced. All right. And Medea is shelled by German submarine on December 12th. German destroyers raid British convoys in the North Sea and sink the HMS Partridge, which is a British destroyer, correct? I believe. It shows that the Germans are attempting to use their fleet, but to be honest, without the capital ships and with the arrival of the American capital ships, there's really no chance for the German fleet at this point.
That's absolutely correct.
The armistice negotiations resume. The Russian Constituent Assembly is dispersed by the Bolsheviks. In other words, the Bolsheviks are seizing complete control now. Right. This is part of the Russian Revolution. This was basically the last. Well, it's the beginning of the last gasps of the Russian provisional government. The French cruiser Chateau Renaud is sunk by submarine. General Sorel is recalled from Sri Lanka. The armistice is signed between the Bolsheviks and Bulgaria and the Central Powers and Turkey, all right, to begin on September 17th. The second offensive battle of Verdun begins, all right? Now, this is actually kind of important, right? Because this was done, this is a limited offensive by the French, all right? And it's done, all right, to prove that to prevent the Germans from understanding how bad the mutiny of the French army has been. All right. Yep. So it's done by hand-picked troops with a very limited scope in what their goals were. It's not the kind of massive all-out offensives that you've been seeing at Verdun. This is just a very small, almost a diversionary type of movement, but it's meant just to demonstrate that the French still have offensive power.
Yep.
All right. Cuba declares war on Austria-Hungary. I don't know what the Cubans are going to do to Austria-Hungary.
Give them a ton of cigars and make them die slowly of cancer.
The British government gives King Hajiz, all right, written assurance of the future of independence of the Arab people. All right, now this is what allows for the creation of Saudi Arabia, right?
Yep.
Isn't the King of Hajj? Isn't Hajjaz? Isn't he Saud?
I'm not entirely sure exactly where he comes from. There's a very, very high possibility that he's Saudi. He could have been Jordanian.
Okay. The armistice between Russia and the Central Powers begins. The Battle of Jaffa begins. The British government issues Order of the Council instituting and the Air Council, which is the establishment, part of the establishment of the Royal Air Force, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, this is the more logistics side of things. What's going to be the structure of it? Like, what equipment are they going to use? What's their role going to be? Going forward.
Battle of Jaffa ends. Peace negotiations between the Russian Bolshevik government and Bulgaria, Central Powers, and Turkey opened in Brest-Litovsk. Right now, so they're going immediately from an armistice to a peace to a peace treaty. Secret convention is signed between Germany and the Russian Bolshevik government concerning Poland. Basically, this establishes Poland as a as a neutral buffer state. That is kind of like a client state of the Germans. All right. But Russia is giving up all of their territorial ambitions with regard to Poland. General Gramont is appointed the Allied commander-in-chief in Sri Lanka. Now, this is basically in the Grecian territory. Lieutenant General Maxwell, the quartermaster general for BEF, resigns. The independent Moldavian Republic, all right, at Beersheba is proclaimed at Kishinev. Lieutenant General Clark is appointed the quartermaster general of the British Expeditionary Force in France. The 12th Battle of Inzio ends. The British defense of Jerusalem begins. This is an attempt by the Ottoman Turks to retake Jerusalem, correct?
That's correct, yeah. They failed.
Admiral Jellicoe, the first Sea Lord of Great Britain, resigns. All right. And he basically leaves the government never to return. Is that correct?
Yes, this is a lot of stuff that was going on about, what was the battle called? Big naval battle. What was the big naval battle called?
Battle of Jutland?
That's the one. Yeah, this is a lot of it still fallout over Jutland. And, like, the historical things aside, we'll do the comical version of the history. It's sort of like, I won bloody Jutland, and this is the way you treat me? Well, you can all get nicked. And then he walks out. You guys,
well, to be honest, he is being savaged by the British press, isn't he, at this point? Mm-hmm. The British press is really, really going at him, because they are being used by let's be honest, they're being used by Beatty, as if Beatty was the big hero, and Beatty, by himself, almost lost the Battle of Jutland for Britain.
Well, as I keep maintaining, it's the whole thing of, like, it was going to be the big showdown. Like, it was the whole reason why we're building all these battleships, so as we could have this gigantic battle like Trafalgar and things like that. And it was, for want of a better term, a non-event. And in fact, the British almost got their asses kicked in it. And the public's looking at the Navy like, hey, what? You said that you were the biggest and the greatest, and that was just a nothing burger. Like, what the hell? And
well, yeah. But the main purpose of the Battle of Jutland is to maintain the British blockade, correct?
Well, yeah, and also it could have been used as a secondary operation to just remove the naval threat from the enemy.
Well, right, but how would it have happened? Okay, let's be perfectly honest. If the Battle of Jutland turns out the way it did, mainly because the Germans' intelligence is far inferior to the British intelligence, all right, and they were not expecting the British fleet to come out like it did. If the Germans had used some proper, operational security on their fleet, right, they could have surprised the British fleet, and it could have been in a completely different, ball game. And in fact, to be honest, if the Germans had said, you know what, we're just going to pull in line and we'll duke this out, they could have savaged the British fleet. Now, they would have won. The British would have won. But it could have been badly damaged to the point where they couldn't have maintained that blockade.
But that's kind of what we were expecting them to happen. Like, okay, yeah, sure, the British, the Royal Navy would have been battered and bruised and stuff like that. But there wouldn't have been a German Navy anymore.
Well, there would have been German submarine, which is really what the biggest threat was at that point anyway, right?
Well, there's that. That was the argument at the time. Why did we spend all this time and effort and money on this gigantic navy and all this so we could thump anybody else down and win, and then we didn't thump them down. So yeah, got Jellicoe and the other bloke fucking going, but it wasn't as easy as that, and they're trying to defend themselves, and everyone's still saying, but no, you should have gone harder.
But what else could they have done? Really, unless they tried to run the block, the the defenses in the German ports themselves, what else could Jellicoe have done?
Yeah, I know. That's just the attitude towards it, though, on our end.
I mean, it would have been. I mean, he could have lost the war for him. I mean, he could have got the British fleet sank if he really wanted to, right?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
really all the options that he had. I mean, if the Germans aren't going to come out to fight, the Germans aren't going to come out to fight. There's not much you can do about that.
There are other Commonwealth navies that they could have, that the British could have seconded from, and all that kind of shit too. But it was just a massive letdown, and Jellicoe and Beatty just got fed up with being criticised over it.
Admiral Sir Rosalind Weymouth was appointed First Sea Lord. Then you have the French Foreign Minister in a speech outlines the French war aims, and Silva de Paz is appointed acting president of Portugal. And finally, the British defense of Jerusalem ends. Basically, the battle for Jerusalem's ended. Okay, let's talk about this for a moment, because this is something that has inflamed the world at this point, and that's the Wobblies. Okay, now the Wobblies are the industrial workers of the world. They're called Wobblies in the United States, and I think that in the English-speaking world, this is a Marxist movement. And this Marxist movement is causing civil unrest throughout the United States. In fact, and the reaction to the Wobblies is taking place as well. Okay, one of the things that the Wobblies do is they attempt to create a strike. In fact, they do get the Seattle in the western ports to go on strike. The workers to go on strike. This is brutally suppressed in the United States. This strike, they bring in strike breakers from the Pinkertons, and they beat these people senseless and basically get the ports back opened up. But this isn't the only thing that they were doing. They were also very much, because once the Bolsheviks took over Russia, they were emboldened to say, look, America shouldn't be at war with these people either. All right. And so they were constantly an anti-war group that was speaking out. And the result is that a lot of Americans got really fed up with this. And internally, you see certain movements taking place. For example, one guy gets convicted of not buying war bonds, right, in Oklahoma. All right. That's what he's convicted of, not buying war bonds. And so on his way to jail, though, the police don't deliver him to the jail. They deliver him to like a Sons of Liberty group, right? Where the guys are beaten, tarred, and feathered. And tarring the feather comes into the fore again. You going to say something, Farty?
No, I was just laughing.
Yeah, is this an actual logo from them? Because this looks like some sort of fanfic of some like secret worlds.
No, this is their logo.
Yeah, this looks. It looks like someone's trying to make Illuminati in some weird fantasy.
Looks like some backwater fucking like aerobics gym or like martial arts, judo, or like somewhere, or like bloody international ninjutsu fighters of the world tournament, some shit like that. The year of separate '80s movie.
They are basically attempting to create the modern the unions basically come out of this. The modern unions basically come out of this, all right. But at the same time, the way these guys are going about it is their focus is on unskilled labor, okay. And this is something that the modern unions learn from, is that you're never going to unionize unskilled labor. You can only unionize skilled labor. Why? It's a very simple concept. If you're unskilled, they can bring in people straight from the farm to do your job, because all you're doing is unskilled. How tough is it for them to replace you? Factory workers are a different story. That's more like skilled labor, which is why in factories you see the unions succeeding. But in another place where the Wobblies initially have a lot of support is down here in Arizona, within the miners. All right. Now, mining is always a dangerous operation, but what's happened is in these mining towns, the companies basically own the entire town. They own the stores. They're providing all the food and so forth to the miners. So basically, they've got a complete monopoly on everything that the miners are dealing with, and the miners also go on strike. Specifically, it's intended to cripple copper production in the United States.
Another issue with the mining thing is the company stores and all that. They'll only pay you enough to survive there. You'll never earn enough to make a profit. Everything in the stores is totally designed so as you have to spend enough money just so as you can live and survive there. And right. once you're in one of these company towns, you're stuck there.
And what's worse is that they prevent anybody from coming in and competing with them. All right. The companies are basically, what they do is if you try to come in there and set up your own store, they come in and burn it down. Okay. I mean, literally. It's not an exaggeration. You're not allowed to compete. Okay. The government, though, in the case of the strike in Arizona, comes in and puts it down. Not the Pinkertons. All right. Because copper is considered a national, a national resource that must be used. It's a critical resource, and therefore they do not allow this to happen. But the Wobblies were one of the groups that gains a tremendous amount of power, all right, until it transitions over into, all right, after the war, all right, into the Communist Workers' Party. This is the beginning of the Communist Workers' Party in the West.
So let me just read this article real quick, because it wasn't just America and the International Workers' Party of the world, the Industrial Workers' Party of the world was of the world pretty much. Also known as the Wobblies, was a radical labor organization founded in the United States in 1905. The organization was opposed to the separation of workers, unions by craft, committed instead to providing one big union for all the workers, including unskilled and semi-skilled workers, ineligible to join established trades unions. By October 1907, the IWW had arrived in Australia with the establishment in Sydney of a club under the aegis of the Socialist Labor Party, and that is still a thing here. Clubs were also established in Melbourne and in the coal mining towns of the Newcastle region and the copper towns near Cobar in the northwestern New South Wales, and in the tin mining towns of Heberton in far north Queensland. In Sydney, male and female members of the IWW met to read, learn, and debate issues at regular meetings and educationals held at the IWW rooms in Sussex Street in Sydney. The women gave talks in the club rooms on such subjects as motherhood, marriage, and prostitution. In 1911, the amendment of the Commonwealth Defence Act provided for the compulsory military training of boys aged between 12 and 18. The IWW began recruiting in earnest, and the discussion clubs became organised IWW locals. With Britain declaring war against Germany in 1914, the Australian government's decision to send troops to serve in support of the mother country. Who wrote this fucking article? Support the mother country. The IWW took every opportunity to oppose the war, arguing that that capitalist society was completely independent on its own working class to provide recruits for its army. The IWW generally acted in defiance of the War Proportions Act, under which censorship controls were introduced in Australia. Members openly sold literature that was deemed prejudicial to recruitment of His Majesty's forces, and by 1916, when the Australian Prime Minister Billy Hughes announced his intention to hold a referendum to introduce conscription, the IWW militant opposition to the war made these activities a key focus for the police and politicians. So they're kicking up stink. They're doing anarchical stuff, and they're getting into trouble for it. New South Wales Police Forensic Photography Archive held in the collections of the Justice and Police Museum includes a box of glass plate negatives labelled IWW Dope. a reference to allegedly incendiary materials, including cotton, waste, and turpentine, found during police raids on IWW premises. The images were a part of the police forensic evidence in 1916. Today, they testify as an organised anti-IWW campaign that by the end of the war had culminated in the suppression of organisation. So this is actually where we've gone and made Nazi-type rulings, like, no groups of more than 10 people, especially with this lot here. And those laws still actually apply today. In Queensland, they've actually got a no association rule for motorcycles, like motorcycle clubs and all this kind of stuff. So if you see more than a couple of guys in their bikie colours and stuff like that, they could be arrested just for being like that. The opening action in the police campaign was the arrest in September of 1915 of Tom Barker, secretary of the Sydney IWW, local, and the editor of the organisation's paper, Direct Action. Barker was arrested for printing a poster calling on workers to follow their masters and stay at home. He said he was found guilty of breaching the regulations of the War Precautions Act, but the conviction was overturned on an appeal. 6 months later, he was again arrested, this time for printing a cartoon that attacked war profiteering. He was convicted and sentenced to 12 months in jail. IWW members strongly opposed that action. Then there's the Sydney 12. Don't worry about them. But basically, what these cunts were doing, right, was they were doing the exact same thing out here. They were getting into like mining towns and things like that. And what they were also doing with us was they got into the stevedores. Was that they're the blokes who unload and load ships, in ports and whatnot. And the stevedores union, pretty much anywhere you go around the world, is the strongest fucking union you will ever see. Like literally, if you get into the stevedores union, you're guaranteed a job for life. You can be literally caught stealing a tank outside of a bonded area, and because you're in that union, you're probably not going to get fired for it. It's literally a dead man's position. So they got into the stevedores unions, and with all the supply ships and stuff that were leaving Australian ports and whatnot, well, they weren't going anywhere because the unions got involved.
Yep. That was they were very much a subversive fifth columnist group, and they didn't care. It was more about trying to gain power. See, that's the problem with all of this. Okay, it's one thing to sit there and have a committed reason for not wanting to do something, but the real reason that the Wobblies were opposed to the war had absolutely nothing to do with the issues of the war themselves or issues of peace or war or whatever. They were just doing it strictly so they could use it as a way for themselves to gain more power. That's one of the reasons why I just like this group so much. They were like the early hippies, right? Now, once again, there's a lot of music that came out of a lot of these supporters. What's it guy? Not Willie Nelson. What's the guy's name?
Oh, not Johnny Cash.
No. Much earlier. I can't think of the guy's name right now. All right. For some reason, I'm vapor locking him. He was basically in support of these guys, right? There was an early American folk singer. I'm trying to remember what the name. Woody Guthrie. Right? And yeah, it's all well and good to sit up there and applaud the concepts that they're talking about, but there comes down to a time and place for this kind of stuff. And they were using these kinds of people to say, okay, we got real issues here. Yeah, but now's not the time. In a war situation, you focus on war industry. No, that isn't the time and place to worry about that kind of stuff. Now, it worked, all right? You saw it work in Russia, but it doesn't work anywhere else. This is why the communists have never been able to ever successfully take over an industrialized state, all right, internally. Meaning if there's a communist revolution, it always happens in agrarian societies. It does not happen in any kind of an industrialized state.
Yeah.
So I think that ends 1917, right?
Basically, yeah.
Okay. So I appreciate everybody coming out. I mean, that's everything I've got, Farty, unless you got something else you want to talk about.
Let's see. Beneath Hill 60. I can't think of a war movie to go and watch for this week. I didn't think of one last week or the week before or the week before that, so I think I'll fuck that tradition off anyways. Have you got anything else to say, Yorkie? Bring anything up?
Sorry, I didn't add much to the conversations, but I think my favourite subjects about World War One and partially World War Two is, I guess, more like how innovative people became, and trying to make new prototypes for, whether it's weapons or body armor. 'Cause there was some basic forms of body armor, but like the only ones that were actually quote unquote useful, there was only enough, like, at least with the British Army, to go around for like 1 in 100 at best, 1 in 100 soldiers, and usually they'd end up getting put right on the fucking front lines of the first wave.
Yeah, that all comes along with war breeds innovation, and that is a fucking fascinating subject. We keep touching on it because, like, just like a lot of things, everything does revolve back towards World War One at one point or another. And I reckon we should do a couple of episodes just doing all the different, like, the obscure shit that fucking nobody knows about that came out about the war and stuff like that.
Yeah, I quite liked the what was it the Germans had, like, it didn't cover the back. I think it was like lobster armor, we nicknamed it. Like, it was good against shrapnel and pistol rounds, but if it's a rifle round from like less than a couple 100 meters away, it's just going to go straight through.
Well, that is something that, we should go over in a bit more, because I did bring this also up in the last episode when we were talking about the stormtroopers. We did touch on elements of body armor there.
Yeah.
Anyway, I reckon that'll be a special all its own, a couple of parters actually. But for that, I think we'll leave that here for the moment. And thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Baby!